Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Press Box Access. Here's a clip from my interview with Vito Stellino. Vito gives us insight into the great Pittsburgh Steelers teams of the 1970s, from his days covering them as a newspaper beat reporter. Well, let's talk about that decade of the 1970s. I mean, you covered those Pittsburgh Steelers teams. You were around them daily. They won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. They were the team of the decade. They still might be the best team ever when you think about it in totality of what they achieved. What was it like to cover that team, and did you realize at the time how great of a team that was? Not just the fact that they were winning, but that you were covering an all-time team.
Yeah, it's interesting. When they won the first 2, and I wrote this, and it kind of ticked off some people in Pittsburgh. I said, to be considered great, you're going to be considered like Lombardi or the Cleveland Browns of the Paul Brown area. You got to win at least 3, you know. And
never enough, Vito.
Yeah. And so in '76, they still think may have been their best team. They had like 5 shutouts. They got off to a bad start, but then they won the last 9 regular season games. Just blew out Baltimore and Burt Jones in the first game. But in that game, Franco and Brocky were both hurt. So they go to Oakland with only one healthy running back, Reggie Harrison. And they lost, so and then the next year they had what Knoll called the year of distractions. They had guys holding out, and so they didn't win again. So then I started to think, maybe it's a 2-year deal. But then the funny thing is, to neutralize the Steeler defense, in effect. In '78, they passed no bumping the receivers after 5 yards. That was the beginning of opening the game up. Well, so the interesting thing about what the Steelers did, they won 2 with one set of rules and 2 more with the other set of rules. Because
you think about it,
the last 2, Bradshaw throwing to Swann and Stallworth, they became much more of a passing team. He threw for 300 yards in the last 2 Super Bowls. First one I think he threw for 129 or something. Super Bowl 9. So, but they had the talent to adjust, and So once they won 3. Then I was saying, hey, this
then they
is
met
really
Vito's
good.
Standards.
Yeah.
Hey, on a daily basis.
But I was going to add another thing. The amazing thing about that team too is they didn't make the money that they made to make today. Or today, the big deal is getting your second contract. Well, that was, in fact, the rookies were making less than the sports writers in those days. They're making less than $20,000 a year. It was amazing.
That's pretty amazing.
But so winning, I'm not saying I want to win now, but winning was like added importance. In that run, they only lost 1 game to a team that finished below 500. If they were supposed to, they lost to, Oakland on occasion and that, but they were supposed to beat you. They beat you, and I remember they lost a game in Cleveland, and they took a bus. In those days, Cleveland's not that far. And driving back, I wasn't on the bus, but I was told this story. One of the players said, "What's Vito going to say about this?"
You're like the conscience of the Steelers.
Yeah.
Well, the great Steelers, those great Steeler teams were led by Coach Chuck Knoll. They had 9 Hall of Fame players. We're talking Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Lynn Swann, John Stallworth. Those were the offensive guys. And then you get to the defense, and you get the Steel Curtain, led by Mean Joe Greene. And you got guys like Jack Ham, Mel Blount, Jack Lambert. Think about it. Think about the talent on that team. And yet it was also different. You were around these guys like every day, and you could just talk to them, right? Unlike today. So tell me what it was like to cover the team on a daily basis.
Well, it was amazing. they were they were very they were still interested in getting coverage. They let you in the locker room before practice. They let you in the locker room after practice, and there weren't all those people in the locker room, so you could go up to Terry Bradshaw and just sit on the bench next to him and just chat with him, and you were just part of the scene. In fact, one time I missed a couple of days, and Bradshaw said, "Where were you?" That type of thing. They're just so used to,
yeah.
And you could have one-on-one chats with them. It wasn't like it's all press. I mean, nowadays the quarterback talks once a week. It's all press conference type stuff, and so it was just a different feeling, and in fact, I don't think they realized themselves what a national team they had become. That's when they became a national team with fans all over the country, because they were on Monday nights a lot,
right.
All the playoff games, and but there was still that feeling, hey, they were Pittsburgh. The Cowboys became America's team. They were big on, hey, we're Pittsburgh's team, that type of thing, and the guys are very down to earth type of thing. In fact, on the field one time, Mel Blount thanked me for writing an article about him, during practice, because this guy's a Hall of Famer.
For writing an article.
Yeah, because they had none of the national coverage that there was no ESPN featuring them all the time and that type of deal.
Chuck Knoll, the coach, what was he like to deal with for a writer?
He liked being invisible. He would do a press conference on Monday, and then he would do a press conference after the game. And during the week, if you really wanted to ask him something, but he didn't hold all these coaching press conferences that you have today. His big thing was talk to the players, and because the players were really good talkers, most of them were, except for Franco. And they gave you so much locker room access that we really didn't deal with Knoll that much, as hard as it is to believe, because you had so much access to the players. But he just liked to stay in the background, He had no interest in promoting himself, and he would claim he never read.
I heard a story once that Knoll actually declined to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Is that right?
Yeah, Paul Zimmerman did a 2-part series on him near the end of the run, and he invited Zimmerman to his home. I mean, he understood that if they wanted to do it, he would cooperate. But then they wanted to shoot a cover, and he said no thanks. He had the self-confidence that he didn't need you to think he was a good coach. He knew he was. And he was like a teacher. That was his big thing. Bradshaw called the plays because he had been a messenger guard for Paul Brown, and he preferred the quarterback. That figured he had taught him all week long, and then on Sunday was the exam, and Bradshaw would call the plays and that type of thing. So
if Chuck Knoll wasn't talking, who was the spokesperson for the team?
In effect, Joe Greene was. He was one of the great quotes of all time. You had to talk to Joe Greene after every game. I mean, Knoll would have a press conference, but Greene would often be much more quotable than Knoll.
So Mean Joe Greene liked to talk to writers. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, he was not. He could be mean in the pile, but no, he was great with writers. And in fact, one time I'm talking to him one-on-one, and he was mad at the officials, and he made some derogatory thing. I forget what he said was. He got fined for it, but I did not have it on tape. He could have denied it. And the next day he said, "Yeah, hey, I said it." He stood by it, that type of thing. He was a stand-up guy, And of course, then the Coke commercial made him a national figure. But he was the leader of the team. And in '74, when Knoll started to gill him the first 6 games, that could have caused a locker room problem. He stood up for Bradshaw. I recognized Bradshaw was still the better quarterback, and so that helped him get through that thing. He was an amazing team leader.
Vito, there's one guy I wanted to ask you about regarding those unbelievable teams that the Steelers had in the 1970s, and that's a guy that's behind the scenes and doesn't get a lot of attention, but his name was Bill Nunn. And he was the scout and later the assistant director of player personnel, an African-American gentleman who really, to me, a lot of people should know more about. Can you tell us about Bill Nunn and the role that he played in putting those teams together?
Well, he was a sports writer for a black newspaper in Pittsburgh, and he covered all the black colleges. He was the guru or the maven, knew everything about the black colleges, and Dan Rooney reached out to him because until then the Steelers had not embraced him much, and Rooney convinced him to become a scout for them. And without Bill Nunn, they don't win 4 Super Bowls, I don't think, because to start with, Stallworth to begin with, Knoll actually thought Stallworth was better than he wanted to draft him first ahead of Swann, and they convinced him, hey, Swann's going to go early. We got to take him first, and then he gets Stallworth on the 4th round. And several other players from the black colleges. A free agent, Donnie, he became a Hall of Famer. And he could have signed anywhere, and his coach told him, hey, you go with the Steelers, you'll get a fair shot. And that was, look at the pictures of the 1973 Dolphins and the 1974 Steelers. 6 of the steel curtain guys were black. Most of the no-name defense in '73 the Dolphins was white. They opened up. They mined the talent in those black schools before other teams did, and that helped them, draft 10 Hall of Famers. And Bill Nunn played a huge role in that. And it was a very self-effacing guy. He was the camp director, at the front desk. And I remember one year the trainer complained about my story about an exhibition game, no less. And Bill Nunn popped up and said, hey, the story is different from the headline. He was a newspaper man. Wow. And I guess the trainer just looked at the headline and what it said, but he didn't like it, and Nunn said, hey, read the story, that type of thing. And he was an amazing guy. It's great they put him in the Hall of Fame because he certainly deserved it.
Well, you mentioned John Stallworth. I think he's a perfect example. John Stallworth grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Bear Bryant, the Alabama coach, didn't even recruit him in his own town.
Yeah.
And Stallworth ends up going to Alabama A&M, and Bill Nunn finds him because of that.
Yeah. And another good story about that is there was a concern about his 40 time, and Nunn got him alone and got a better time on him, and then scooped up the films of it from the school and said, I'll bring these back and we'll forward them to the other teams. Those films never left the Steeler offices. And Stallworth said at the time, I think Alabama was integrated by 1974. 1970. I think they were integrated. But he said he was only they were only taking the best of the best. And Stallworth had not been a star high school player. Going to an all-black school in Tuscaloosa, didn't get much attention. And
Right.
but imagine he goes to Alabama, and he's a first-round draft choice probably, you know.
Right.
So
Well, John Stallworth was certainly fast enough in January of 1980, the Steelers' fourth Super Bowl appearance that decade of the 70s. They had won 3. They're going for their 4th, but they're trailing. They're losing to the Los Angeles Rams at the Rose Bowl Stadium, 19-17, with about, a dozen minutes to go in the game. It's 3rd and 8. And that sets up a play that means a lot in your memories of Super Bowls, right?
70 slot, hook, and go. And Knoll sent the play in. It had not worked in practice well. Swann was hurt, so they're double covering Stallworth. So they went deep. Bradshaw took a deep drop, to give Stallworth time to get to the opposing 30-yard line. So they were like at the 28 or so, something around there. So he threw the ball about 50 yards in the air, dropped right into. Well, you remember the catch? It was on the cover of SI. I still think that's got to be one of the greatest plays in Super Bowl history, and it's been almost forgotten because just another Super Bowl win, but it was just perfect execution, double coverage, a Hall of Famer throwing to a Hall of Famer, and also, unfortunately, CBS zeroed in close on Stallworth instead of pulling back. It was in the Rose Bowl. Half of the fans were waving terrible towels in the mountains in the background. It was at night. And the last 30 yards, Stallworth was running alone. Eddie Brown had made a dive for the ball, missed it, went to the ground. And so for the last 30 yards, he's just running all by himself. It was like putting the exclamation point on the dynasty.